The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar today on maximising your apprenticeship levy. We've got a fantastic opportunity to find out a great deal about the levy, what it means, how it works and how you can make the most of it with Jack Kennedy from the Department of Education, who's come to talk to us today. My name is Alison Cox, I'm Head of Apprenticeships here at the CMI, and welcome to those of you that are joining for what may be your second, third or fourth webinar, and equally welcome to those of you who've not participated in one of these before. Just a few housekeeping rules before we start. Can somebody please just type in using either a chat or questions box, which is to the right-hand side of your screen, to let me know that you can hear us okay. Fabulous, thank you Martin, that's brilliant. Suzanne, Louisa, excellent. Okay, looks like it's all working. We will be recording this webinar, so you will be able to access it after the event at your leisure should you wish to, and we will make sure that you get the details of how to find it. We also have other webinars that have previously been recorded, posted on our CMI website. If you go to the apprenticeship section and resources, you'll be able to find those there, and this one will also be posted there too. We have taken into account all the questions that those of you who responded previously have posed around the levy. Jack's had a chance to look at those and we're pretty confident that we'll cover off all of those during the presentation. But please do feel free to pose questions as we go. What we will do is we will review the questions and we will hold those till the end, and Jack will endeavour to answer as many as he can. And if we don't get to respond to all of them, then we will do our best to respond to you afterwards on those. That will be fantastic, I think. Okay, so we have roughly an hour, so we will probably aim to allow sort of 5–10 minutes of questions at the end, but I know Jack has an exciting slide deck to take you through, so we'll see how the timing goes. So what we will do is obviously just very quickly, I'm going to just give you an introduction to CMI, then we'll move into the meat of today, which is the Apprenticeship Levy, and if we have time, just a tiny bit on the pathways that are available to you in terms of the leadership and management standards. So for those of you that may not know CMI, we are all about better led and better managed organisations, and as the professional body we are really looking to increase the number and the standard of professional qualified managers out there in the workplace. For us, creating a true profession for managers is absolutely paramount, and we see these trailblazer standards as being an absolutely superb way of being able to do this. If you do have any questions or want to know any more about any of the standards or what we do as CMI, our website is a great place to go, loads of information, resources, case studies, etc. there. But no more from me, I'm going to hand you over to Jack because this is what you want to hear. He is going to take us through how the landscape is changing, as we like to call it, the age of apprenticeships is here, and Jack is going to tell you how you can make the most of your levy. Over to you, Jack.
Great, thank you very much, Alison. It's rare that a slide deck from government is described as exciting, so I'll try and live up to that expectation. But yeah, my name is Jack Kennedy. I'm from the Apprenticeship Funding Unit at the Department for Education, and today I'm going to take you through the latest information about the apprenticeship funding reforms, so focusing on the levy, especially as that comes into play from tomorrow, but also what that means for non-levied employers, and also a quite detailed look into the apprenticeship service, which is the online system that will allow you to manage your apprenticeship programs. So I'll start with a bit of context as to why we're bringing the reforms, which have been described as the biggest shake-up to apprenticeship or to skills funding in a generation. Talk a bit about what they are, how they're going to apply to you, how you will pay the levy, and guidance from HMRC on that. Then we'll go into quite a detailed look on the apprenticeship service, and maybe if we get time, have a look at, in more detail at the funding rules and what happens in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland as well. So as I said, biggest shake-up to skills funding in a generation. Why would we contemplate bringing something like that in? Well, there's quite a lot of reasons, but some of the main ones, and something that certainly has been picked up in the media again recently, is really around this productivity puzzle as it's being described. And we continue to be behind other leading nations from the G7, the G20, and across Europe in terms of our productivity. We know that linked to this, employers are investing less in workplace training than they did, say, 20 years ago. And again, when we look and compare ourselves against European nations and other leading G7 nations, we are behind in measures around that. Also, we know that relative social mobility has stagnated or declined over recent years, and we see apprenticeships as an opportunity to not be the golden bullet or the silver bullet for solving that problem, but at least as a means of offering up opportunities to people from all backgrounds of all ages. We know that what we do with apprenticeships, although we got 2.4 million starts over the course of last Parliament, and you may well know the manifesto commitment to achieve 3 million starts by 2020 in the lifetime of this Parliament. We know that it's a programme that could be bigger and better. And so there are a number of things that we've committed to doing. So as I've said, achieving 3 million starts by 2020. We are bringing in new apprenticeship standards, as Alison mentioned earlier, replacing apprenticeship frameworks, and these are employer-led. Groups of employers come together and design a standard that is right for that occupation and really delivers the skills that both the apprentice and the employer needs going forward. We, from Saturday, the 1st of April, and it wasn't an April Fool's, the Institute for Apprenticeships came into force. And this, again, is an employer-led body, which is there really to oversee standards and ensure the quality and rigour of apprenticeships. We've given equal legal protection to apprenticeships, so no one can just call whatever training they provide in apprenticeship if it doesn't meet the standards of what we define as an apprenticeship, and that works in a similar way to degrees. We're introducing a target for public sector bodies to have 2.3% of their workforce as apprentices from April this year as well. And as of last April, we abolished secondary class 1 national insurance contributions for those apprentices under the age of 25. So there's a lot going on in this world. A lot of change happening, and clearly now is a really crucial time for delivering on this. And all of this change is going to be underpinned by a new funding system, which is really going to be delivered through the Apprenticeship Levy. So I'm going to move on to talk about the practicalities of the levy. And there's a quote from our Minister about apprenticeships. But I'm going to move on to talk about really the practicalities of the levy. And I want to take it back to basics. I know some of you may well be fully versed in this and know it back to front. Some of you might be coming to this for the first time, and especially as we're getting very close to the introduction of the levy, you might just want to be clear on all of the sort of basics. So what is the Apprenticeship Levy? Well, it's starting tomorrow. It's introduced tomorrow, and from tomorrow, employers with a pay bill of more than 3 million will be have to pay 0.5% of that into their apprenticeship service account to be spent on apprenticeship training and assessment. It applies to all UK employers across all sectors, so public, private and third sector. Each employer gets a £15,000 allowance, which is not a cash payment, but effectively it's the mechanism to make sure that only employers who have a pay bill of more than 3 million are paying into the levy. And effectively that means that only 1.3% of employers across the UK will be paying towards the levy. Now that clearly leaves a large proportion of employers who will not be paying into the levy. And some of you on the call may well be part of this group. So we've designed a co-investment system for those employers who either haven't paid the levy and want to purchase apprenticeship training, or those employers who do pay the levy but who have insufficient funds in their digital account to pay for the cost of training assessment that they want to purchase. And for both these examples, as an employer, you'll only be expected to contribute 10% of the training costs, training and assessment costs for your apprentice, with the government providing the remaining 90% of the funding costs. I'll talk a bit more in detail later about how that works in practice with the funding bands, but we'll come on to that in a bit. Now, as an employer, if you are needing to report and pay the levy, I think there's some really good guidance out there from HMRC. There's a sort of the links there don't come up particularly well, but there's a page at the back of the slide pack which happy to share with you, which also has a link to the guidance. There's a sort of shorter guidance which gives some useful overview, but there's also a very detailed manual that HMRC have published, which will allow you to spend a bit more time and get to grip with some examples around how the paying and reporting works. I think the really key things here are to be aware of how much your pay bill is and whether it was over 3 million last year or whether you're expecting it to go over the 3 million threshold in the coming year, 27-18. Clearly, for some organisations, that's quite a simple process. You might just be an individual employer who has a pay bill that's clearly over 3 million. There will be occasions where there are a group of companies who might have individual pay bills of less than 3 million, but because they're connected, they will have a shared liability for paying the apprenticeship levy. And thus, even though they may have a smaller pay bill than 3 million, the way the allowance is shared between them means that they have a liability to pay. So worth really having a look at the guidance, spending a bit of time with that if you haven't already, and getting to grips with whether you need to pay the apprenticeship levy, especially if you're an employer who's maybe very much on that threshold, or if you're connected to other employers and need to think about how you're going to organise your allowance and share your allowance between you. Quick overview of how the funding system will work. So I should have said on the last slide that the way the apprenticeship levy is collected by HMRC is through the pay-as-you-earn system, much in the same ways as an employee pay in national insurance contributions, etc. It's collected by HMRC, but then apportioned to your account that you have on the apprenticeship service, with a 10% top up from government. That's provided whatever you contribute into your account, you automatically get a 10% top up from government. As a levy paying employee, you can then start to take on an apprentice and commit to the training. And once you've started to receive that training from a training provider, payments will be taken from your digital account, directly paid to the provider, and you have up to 24 months to spend the money that's in your apprenticeship service account. When we initially came out, we said that that would be an 18-month expiry date, but actually now you have up to 24 months. That was based on the feedback that we got from a lot of employers saying that 2 years was a better planning cycle for them. It also gave them more flexibility and a bit more time to adjust to the new system and think about how they want to use their levy before having to commit to anything. We'll always use the oldest funds in your account, so you'll always have a full 2 years to spend money that's entered your account before it's expired. If we look at the non-levied employer route, it's at the moment it's quite similar to how it works now. So the non-levied employer takes on an apprentice, commits to the training. They get that training from the training provider. As an employer, you must pay your 10% contribution, and then the SFA, Skills Funding Agency, recently rebranded to be the Education and Skills Funding Agency. They will pay the government their proportion of the cost, which will be the 90%. I think I will look to move on because we've got a lot of detail to get through. I mentioned before that 6th of April is the start date for the levy, and that is very much the date where employers have to start paying the apprenticeship levy. However, a really key date in the sort of timeline is the 1st of May, and that's because that's when the new funding rules come into existence. And you may ask, why is there that gap? And part of the reason is that employers are paying the levy on the 6th of April, but they won't start to see money in their apprenticeship service account until May. And so it seemed unfair that we're applying rules on you as employers that you can't actually access your funding until a month later. So although the levy starts on the 6th of April, the way you can use the levy and the funding rules that apply with it come in from the 1st of May. The important thing about that is that any apprenticeship starts you make in the next month, so before the 1st of May, would still adhere to the current funding rules. And that's for the lifetime of the apprenticeship. So even if it's a 2-year apprenticeship that starts on the 15th of April, that will be funded through to completion on the current funding rules, and won't transition on to the new funding rules. So you won't be able to use levy contributions for that particular apprenticeship if it started before the 1st of May. So you've got money in your account, and as a levy paying employer and also as a non-levy paying employer, in terms of the contribution that government is providing, the 90%, what can that actually be used for? Well, if we go back to the rationale for why we're bringing in such changes, we really want to focus this on the skills training that will deliver the productivity solutions that we want, the social mobility solutions that we want. So we're really focusing what you can spend your apprenticeship levy contributions and the government funding on apprenticeship training and assessment. And it must be against an approved framework or standard with an approved training provider and assessment organisation, so one that is on the register of apprenticeship training organisations, training providers, sorry, which we announced back in the middle of March, and we are reopening the register. It's currently reopened for new applications for those who either missed the first round or didn't get onto the register. And that registers our mechanism to make sure that all the training that employers are given and apprentices are given is really of the right quality and the right standard and delivering the right apprenticeships that we want for the future. What this does mean is that those funds can't be used for things like wages, can't be used for things about sort of infrastructure costs of setting up a program if you haven't had an apprenticeship program before, managerial costs for taking on apprentices in the workplace, etc. It's really focused on spending on the training and assessment costs. So I'm going to move on now to talk a bit about the apprenticeship service, and I've got a lot of sort of screenshots over the next. There's quite a lot of slides. I'll try and rattle through them and just really give you a flavour of what the apprenticeship service looks like. Some of you might already be registered. Some of you might not have contemplated registering yet. I would recommend that you do if you are a levy paying employer, so you're prepared to use your apprenticeship funds from the 1st of May. And essentially, the apprenticeship service has 5 major parts to it. You'll note, so in the top left corner there, it's still called the Digital Apprenticeship Service, and that was its name for a long time, or the DAS, some people called it. We've now just moved to the name Apprenticeship Service, so apologies that slide is slightly out of date. But effectively, if anyone ever talks about the DAS or the Digital Service, it's the same thing as the Apprenticeship Service. So there are parts here that can be done by both non-levy and levy-paying employers. So steps 1, 2, and 5 are open for all employers. and really 3 and 4 are there to just functionality for levy paying employers at the moment, until non-levy employers are moved on to the service, which is going to happen later down the line. So if we move on to step 1, which is about planning your apprenticeship program. Some of you might have already used this tool, what we call our Estimate My Funding tool. And it's really a mechanism to allow you to calculate whether you will pay the levy or not. Also, how much you might have to spend on apprenticeships. And it's a very simple tool. It's there as it says, as an estimator. It's not there. You might want to take a bit more of a scientific and sort of calculated look at how much exactly you're going to be paying, but based on some data that you share, such as your annual UK payroll, and also your percentage of your employees that live in England. It will then do a calculation and tell you a number of things about how much you're going to be paying and what funding you'll have available to you to use from the 1st of May. I'm just going to pause on this slide to mention this bit about why we ask what percentage of your employees live in England. It's an important point because the way that funding is worked is what you see in your digital apprenticeship service account, I'm still calling it the old name, is the proportion of funding that you have available to spend in England. And how we work that out is based on the postcodes of your workers. So what proportion of your pay bill is spent in England compared to the devolved administrations. So if I just take an example, maybe if you're, say, a local authority who's based in Kent, and all of your employees live in the surrounding 20 miles from the office, and so all have an English postcode, all of your pay bill, 100% of your pay bill is being paid to employees who live in England. Therefore, you will see 100% of your apprenticeship levy contributions in your apprenticeship service account, plus the 10% top up that you get. If you're an employer who has offices in London, in Cardiff, in Glasgow, and Belfast, you might only pay 80% of your pay bill, annual pay bill, to employees who live in England, and the rest goes to employees who live in the devolved administrations. Therefore, you will see 80% of your funding, 80% of your contribution in your apprenticeship service account, plus the 10% top up from government. Now, that remaining 20% doesn't just disappear. That's there to help the funding for the devolved administrations and the apprenticeship systems that they provide in Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. And I'll have a bit more detail about that later on. So then you can, on this Estimate My Apprenticeship Funding tool, you can select the type of training you want, how many apprentices you might take on, when they will start, and you're given a calculation about how much credit you have coming in, what spending you have going out, and if there comes a point where you move into the co-investment model, how much you'll have to pay on top of your levy contributions to be able to meet the overall cost of your training. So part 2 is about choosing apprenticeship training. And again, this is a section that's available to all employers, and it's functional now, and you can go and be using it, and it's hopefully quite self-explanatory area where you're able to just have a look based on search results. It's a search-based tool, so you might want to look, as in this example, for engineering apprenticeships, and it should be clever enough, and I believe it is clever enough to pick up if you on different words and be able to sort of understand what you're trying to get to, much in the way that Google does. And so you can see here that if you've done a search for engineer, there are 160 apprenticeships there that come out. The ones that are marked as new are the apprenticeship standards, so they're the newer ones that we've been delivered, and they're the ones that we're transitioning to away from the old style apprenticeship frameworks. So you might want to look out for those that have that badge. And then if you click into an individual one, gives you all the information about a summary, essentially, of what that standard is, what the funding band will be, so how much you can spend on that, and the typical length, what entry requirements there are, the job roles that the training is designed for, and any practical and theory-based qualifications that the apprentice can achieve through that. So that's a really good way of being able to find the apprenticeship that you think will suit your organisation. But of course, once you've found that apprenticeship, you also want to find who's going to be able to help you deliver that in terms of the training. As an employer, you might do that yourself if you are an employer and provider as one. But often, more often than not, you'll be looking to find a third-party training provider, which could be a further education college, it could be an independent training provider, and you can have a look at finding one that's located near you and gives you the opportunity to have a look at how they work and where they're based, what their training options are, so information that will be available around employee satisfaction and achievement rates. And you can also be confident that any results that come up through this, these are these are training providers who have made it through the Register of Apprenticeship Training Provider process. So they are all there, they're all able to deliver training to employers who wish to spend their levy. And as and when new providers make the register, then they'll be added on to this, and you'll get the opportunity to find out more training providers when you do searches later down the line. So step 3 is really about levy paying employers. And there's the link there. It's also at the end of this slide pack to go and register securely to set up an employer account. And hopefully our feedback that we've had, and part of the reason why we think we've had this feedback is that we've worked a lot with employers in the design of this service. But the feedback that we've had has been very positive about how easy the process is to register, and just how quick it is, how it can be done in 10-15 minutes, especially if you're sort of quite a simple organisation in terms of your structure, you're not connected to lots of employers. But there are a few things that you will need along the way. So before you go and register, you'll need to have things like your company's house number, your government gateway details. If you're a charity, then your charity number. And we'll just ask you some fairly simple things around getting you set up as a user, give some quite easy details, asking you for a secure password to create your account. The person that initially sets up the account does not need to be the person that uses the account on a regular basis, because additional users can be added once the account has been created. And we'll show you that in a bit. But that helps in terms of thinking about, I think a lot of employers have sort of delayed registration because they don't know who should own it and who wants to do it. But getting started, that can be anyone from the organisation, whether that's your payroll team or the HR team, or whoever wishes to sort of take that first step, that's fine. How you then sort of manage your account later on is up to you, and you'll be able to think about who gets what rights and responsibilities within your account at a later stage. So you can then go and add an organisation, and this should be an organisation that will make an agreement with a training provider, so i.e. will be committing to apprenticeship training, and then more organisations can be added once the account has been created. And this is sort of an example page of an employer there, Red and White Holdings PLC, and you can, if you haven't been able to have a look at the service, this is really what it looks like. And really from here you have the option to add, remove or edit team members and users of your account. You can view your finances and forecast funds. You can manage your pay-as-you-earn schemes because you may have more than one in your organisation. You can manage your organisations and agreements with training providers. You can update the status of your apprentices or recruit new ones. And there's also a link to find apprenticeship training. So you can go and explore any new opportunities for apprenticeship training that you want as well. So as I said, we know that employers want to be able to invite others from their organisation to be able to use their account. So we've created the functionality to do that. But of course, there'll be people within your organisation that you want to have different roles and responsibilities. And so there's a way of being able to manage individual user privileges, and whether they sort of do everything and they can make agreements with training providers and commit to spending, or whether they're just sort of able to view information and know what the latest is in terms of how many apprentices you have in your program and what spending's going on. That's really up to you. And again, hopefully it's a very simple process to invite someone and set their levels of responsibility. Once the account has been created, it's still possible to add additional pay-as-you-earn schemes and manage the existing schemes you have already linked to your account. And here you can see an example where they've got multiple pay-as-you-earn schemes. And there's that mention of the English percentage. So you can see there that in this example, one pay-as-you-earn scheme only pays 34% of its pay bill to employees who have an English postcode. And therefore, for that pay-as-you-earn scheme, you will only see 34% of the contribution you make into your apprenticeship service account. You can also have a look at the sort of historic information about the English percentage. So it gives you an idea of where you have been before and a breakdown of that information. Should say actually that this information was first calculated in February 2017, so a couple of months ago, from HMRC data that's provided by employers through the real-time information process. And then that calculation will run every 3 months from July, October, January and April each year, so on an ongoing cycle, which means that if employee details change, that new information will be reflected in your English percentage calculation. You might also want to, as well as adding pay-as-you-earn schemes, if you are set up in a connected way, you might want to add organisations. And so you can do that through this section, where you can add additional connected organisations to your account. By adding these organisations, you are enabling them to authorise payments to your training providers when they sign the necessary employer agreements. And then I think the last bit on section 3 is about viewing your levy and sort of giving you the functionality to have a look at how much you have as your balance, what credits have come in, and also what debits are going out, and some actual detail as to when that happened, who you're paying, what contract reference that is in relation to, etc. So giving you the full ability, much like a bank account, to just be on top of how much you have in your account, how much you're spending, how much you have going forward. You even have the detail about what funds might be lost if you don't use them, i.e. if you've waited more than up to 24 months to spend it. You can see here that this company has £1,000 that's going to be expiring in less than 3 months in this example. So it allows you to think about how you want to maximise your funding. And again, this gives you the option to see what committed spending you have coming up. So in yearly periods, how much at the moment are you committed spending? How does that relate to what you have coming in? So section 4, again, this is for levy paying employers, because this is making agreements with training providers. And it's a really important point, because to direct funding to the selected training provider, there needs to be 3 agreements in place to make that happen. So we will ask you to accept an employer agreement for each of your organisations that will spend your funds. That agreement will give you the authority to access the funds in your account to manage your apprenticeships, and you must agree to all the terms and conditions in this agreement and to the funding rules before the funds can be used to pay for apprentices. Once you sign that agreement, you'll be able to authorise the Skills Funding Agency to pay for the apprenticeship training and endpoint assessment with the training provider you have chosen to manage your apprenticeships. That agreement is already now available to sign from within your account, and we would suggest that you share that with your legal team if you haven't done so already before signing it, making sure that you're happy to do so. Separately, as you negotiate and agree the price you're willing to pay for the apprenticeship directly with the training provider, i.e. this is a service that you're procuring, and once you sort of enter a relationship with the training provider, you'll want to think about how much you're willing to pay for that service. Each apprenticeship has a separate funding band, and I'll talk about this in a bit, but you'll be able to negotiate the price. That is not the price of the apprenticeship, it's the funding band that it sits in. So as an employer, you can go out to market and decide, I'm willing to pay this for this service, and negotiate between different training providers if that's the approach you want to take. But that also means that you need to have an agreement set up with the provider as well as a contract for service. Okay. So if you want to do this, you can go into your apprenticeship service account and select your organisation and agreements, and that will then allow you to see what agreements you have and haven't signed, and whether you are able to spend the money that's in your apprenticeship service account. You can see here that the spending status is set as disabled because no agreement has been signed. I'll just give you a few screenshots of what that might look like. And as you can see, that's available on gov.uk and also through your apprenticeship service account to have a look at. So would recommend, if you haven't done so already, certainly before the 1st of May, you want to be thinking about signing up to those agreements so that you're in a position to actually use your levy contributions. You can then go and add apprentices onto your account and add some details about the apprentices that you're taking on in your organisation, and you can have a look at what that means for your overall cohort. So here we're adding John Smith as an aerospace engineer, and now we know we've got a cohort of 1, and we know what the total cost will be because we've agreed to that, and we know when the training dates will run from and what apprenticeship they're doing. and we can keep track of that cohort. And clearly, that will be quite beneficial for employers who have lots of different apprenticeships going on, maybe with many different training providers at different levels, and will be a good way of being able to track exactly what apprenticeships are occurring in your organisation. Now the last bit is actually, this is open for all employers, so this is open for levy and non-levy paying employers, and this is the recruit and apprentice section, and through this, training providers post vacancies for apprenticeships and traineeships on your behalf. It's a free-to-use service, and it enables providers to manage your apprenticeship vacancies in one place and allows them to really feed back to you on the current status of each vacancy. We are working on the functionality to make it so that employers can advertise their own vacancy through this service rather than having to go through the training provider, and we'll keep employers aware of when that functionality is open and available. The aim is that this place becomes the one or the main source of for apprentices to be searching for opportunities for them, and clearly there are different mechanisms for that in the market at the moment and how apprentices find their opportunities, but we know that there's a lot of traffic that goes to this site, and it's a successful site in terms of employers being able to find the right apprentices for their opportunities that they are advertising. Just this last slide on the apprenticeship service. As I mentioned at the beginning, that feedback has been a really important part of how we've designed the service, and it's not that we're ending it there and that's it, and then employers have to use it. Regardless, we want to continue listening to employers, to training providers, and hearing from you about functionality. Does it do what you need it to? What are the bits that are missing? What are the bits that work really well? So there are opportunities throughout the process when you're in your service account to provide that feedback, and we would be most appreciative if you do take the opportunity to do so. So I'm just going to touch on a few key milestones. Back in March, I mentioned before, the Register for Apprenticeship Training Providers was published. The new round for that is still open, and it's open until the 7th. Thank you, Alison. 5 p.m. on the 7th. So Friday, so not long, but it's been open for the last few weeks. And then the results of that will be published in due course, but we're aiming to do that certainly as soon as we can and try and get results back out sort of May, June time. And we'll keep employers and training providers aware of the timeline for that. Of course, tomorrow is the beginning of the Apprenticeship Levy, and in April you'll now be able to do things like sign employer agreements, sign the provider agreements, record commitments with providers through your account, and on the 1st of May the new funding arrangements come into place and you'll start to see money actually in your account, and you can start to actually use it, and then from June you'll see that money go out of your account for any May training that was delivered in May. And then obviously a longer term aim is for us to ensure that all employers are able to use the service and the functionality that it provides, but that's sort of over the next few years that we're looking into that. Very aware of the time, so I'm going to try and keep this quite short, but just some further detail really about the funding rules, so how the funding service will work from the 1st of May. Now, I've mentioned a few times funding bands, and some of you might be aware of these. If you've been involved in apprenticeship standards and taking people on and through standards, there were 6 funding bands previously. we've now extended that to 15 different bands, and every apprenticeship, whether it's a framework or a standard, will be placed in a funding band. And what that means is that the limit, the upper limit, well, there is no lower limit, but the top limit of the funding band, so as you can see, ranging from 1,500 up to 27,000, that caps the maximum amount of digital funds an employer who pays the levy can use towards an individual apprenticeship. It also caps the amount that the government will co-invest towards where an employer does not pay the levy or has insufficient digital funds to pay for the apprenticeship. So if we take an example, if you have an apprenticeship that is placed in funding band 8, which has a band limit of £6,000, that means that is the maximum amount of money you can use from your apprenticeship service account to spend on that individual apprenticeship. As I said earlier, that doesn't mean that's the cost of it, because as an employer, in this employer-led system, you have the ability to go out and procure the service that you wish with training providers and negotiate the price. And that might be higher or lower than the funding band, but anything that you negotiate above the funding band cost, you would need to pay separately outside of your apprenticeship service account. So how we've sort of worked out how we should transfer existing apprenticeship frameworks and apprenticeship standards into different funding bands. We've had to do a lot of work with employers and training providers, thinking about what the right levels of funding is for each of these apprenticeships. And there's essentially what we've done with frameworks is the fact that we have allocated each individual framework to the nearest funding band based on the current rate of funding, i.e. pre-May funding, that the government pays providers for training adult apprentices, but with some extra support, because we know there are areas which will need extra funding. So 16 to 18-year-olds, those taken on by training providers, will provide extra support for 20% of the funding band maximum to be paid directly to training providers. And that also applies to 19 to 24-year-olds who are formally in care or who have an education and healthcare plan. For science, technology, engineering and maths frameworks, we've increased the funded rate by 40% at level 2 and 80% at level 3 and above, because we recognise that those frameworks often incur higher costs. And we're also providing extra support to training providers who are taking on apprentices who come from deprived areas, and that's based on the indices of multiple deprivation. And there's a sort of range of extra funding support that we're providing depending on where they live. All of that funding comes directly from the government. That's not from an employer's apprenticeship service account. That comes directly from us rather than an employer. Similarly, we had to take a similar process with apprenticeship standards and think about how we're going to place those into the right funding band. And what we've done here is really thought about taking into account existing information around standards, where we know what prices employers have negotiated with providers. We know evidence from trailblazer groups who have set out the estimated costs for the apprenticeship training. We can look at what funding bands similar or equivalent frameworks are based on, and also having a look at the level and the nature of the training and what the right amount of funding support for that would be. So it's not just a sort of random allocation process where we just sort of apply a number to a framework and hope that it sticks. there's been a lot of evidence and a lot of discussion with employers and training providers to make that process work. There are some areas where we're also providing additional support. So you may well be aware, for employers who take on 16 to 18-year-olds, we'll pay £1,000 to the employer and also £1,000 to the training provider when they take on 16 to 18-year-old apprentice. That's for levy and non-levy paying employers. And it's very much the same with disadvantaged young people. And the way we define that is 19 to 24-year-olds who have previously come from a care background, so have left the care system, or who have a local authority education and healthcare plan. And again, employers will get £1,000, training providers will get £1,000. Small employers with fewer than 50 employees will have 100% of their training and assessment costs covered when they take on a 16 to 18-year-old. So in that sense, you don't even need to worry about the 10% contribution that we ask for through co-investment. 100% of that cost for small employers will be met by the government. And we're retaining additional learning support and English and maths training support for apprentices, and all of that funding will come directly to training providers from the government. Very quickly, some of the funding rules that are really important and that employers are very interested in. If I start with the prior qualifications one, apprenticeships have long been there to provide progression and to help individuals to take a higher level qualification than they already hold. From May 2017, an individual can be funded to undertake an apprenticeship at the same or lower level to acquire substantive new skills in a materially different subject area. Now, that's quite an important point because it opens up flexibility for employers about how they wish to use it, because they might mean you start to think about this not just being for new starts and new people coming into your organisation, but also thinking about developing your workforce and using apprenticeships as a route for progression internally as well. So that opens up those avenues. Cross-border funding, the way you can use your money in the English apprenticeship system is based on whether the apprentice's main place of employment is England. So they might actually live in Scotland, they can even be trained in Scotland, potentially, but if their main place of employment, i.e. they spend 50% of their time working in England, then they can be funded through the English system. And also on transfers, so we've long said that we want to look into the issue of transferring funding, because we know a lot of employers wish to be able to share funding with those in their supply chain or in their sector. And we are introducing the means for employers to transfer up to 10% of their levy funds to another employer or to an apprenticeship training agency. We've had an employer steering group who've met many times over the last few weeks and months, and the outcomes of that are going to be announced soon. But essentially, we're sticking with the fact that we'll be allowing the transfer of up to 10%, and we'll continue to review that once it's been made available. Coming very close to the end, thank you for listening so much. But this is just a quick slide, which when you get the slides, you might want to take a bit more looking into, depending on whether it affects you, whether you have any employees based in Scotland and Wales. You'll notice that Northern Ireland is missing. No decisions have yet been reached in Northern Ireland about how the apprenticeship system will work for next year. But both Scotland and Wales have set out more details about how they intend to use the funding that's being provided through the levy to both of their administrations. So worth having a look at those links if it's something that affects you. And speaking of having a look at links, the last slide is just some very useful, well, I'm hoping useful guidance on different things about how the funding will work, where you can go to register for the service, information about the training providers, the funding rules, the HMRC guidance on paying the levy, and also a blog which is written by the Skills Funding Agency, or the Education and Skills Funding Agency as it's now called, which sort of sets out just some of the ways and means that we've been delivering the apprenticeship service, and gives you a bit of an insight into the mechanism of creating a service like that. So there's also contact details. If you have queries, there is help available from the Skills Funding Agency through the phone, and also email as well. So hopefully that was useful. There's a lot of detail there, I appreciate, and some of the slides I had to really race through. But I'm hoping that if you're new to this, or even if you're quite well versed in it, you got something out of that, and I'll be happy to take some questions now.
Excellent, thank you. We'll just whiz through these and move to questions. There have been a few that have come in, thank you very much. A few who've posted questions and then said, cancel that, my question's been answered. So just shows that we've been doing the job, so thank you, Jack. One question that did come in was in regards of an international company. So if they have a pay bill which is over 3 million but worldwide, but in the UK it will be less than 3 million, what do they pay? Do they pay the levy or not?
So it's based on what they pay in terms of national insurance contributions through their UK payroll. So they need to go and work out how they're paying those employees who are based elsewhere, whether they're still paid through the UK tax system, or whether they're paid through sort of separate system they have paid in America or Australia or wherever. So they need to go and study that.
Okay, thank you very much. There were several questions around things like, obviously the devolved nations where people are based and so on, but we've answered those. One question did come in, and I've heard this myself, is will employers be able to have some sort of rule in relation to payback if an apprentice leaves once they've completed their apprenticeship, bearing in mind the investment that has been made in that individual?
Yeah, so I know this is something that's come up a few times, and I know this bit of policy that the Education and Skills Funding Agency is looking into. I would just at this point highlight one of the links that I put up there was for the Apprenticeship Funding Rules, and if you haven't seen that already, it's a 30-page document, so it's not a light read, but there is a lot of information there about some of these technical questions that you might have, and I know that's continually being evaluated, and new versions of that are coming out as we do new policy around these issues. So that's one issue that I know is being considered at the moment.
Okay, thank you. One question that's just come in, and given the time we've got left, you may not be able to find a comprehensive answer, but one question is around, can you provide any clarity around subcontracting and brokerage fees?
That is a good question. You might be disappointed in this answer, but I would point you to the funding guidance again. There's guidance for both employers, for training providers, for employer providers, and I think that is your best source for that information.
That's great, thank you, Jack. There have been a few questions around things like just wanting to understand the difference between standards and frameworks, entry criteria, the age size of things. Yep. So I think just very quickly, in terms of the difference between standards and frameworks, frameworks have been in existence for some time. They are gradually being replaced by standards as employers design a new set of criteria around knowledge, skills and behaviours for the roles, as Jack articulated before. So as new standards come on stream, frameworks will disappear. So that's basically the difference, but there is much more detail I know available on the .gov site about the difference between the two. In terms of age criteria, there are no restrictions anymore. That's a fabulous situation we're now in, and I must admit, one of the most exciting changes that we saw when all of this started. So no issues around age, but obviously some incentives if you're taking on a young person. And in terms of qualifications, I think that Jack did touch on how the qualifications bit works. There's a lot more flexibility now with the standards going forward about not worrying about what qualifications somebody already has, but thinking about the occupation and the role they're moving into and what is pertinent to that. So if someone does have a degree, but it's in geography, like myself, absolutely no relevance to what I do now, I could actually undertake the Chartered Manager degree apprenticeship because I would then be getting a degree in business and management. So hopefully that clarifies that side of things. Please do feel free to continue asking questions. We will track them. You can always just email us with them, or obviously Jack's given you lots of links to where you can go for further information. Here at CMI, we're really happy to provide any support that you need around leadership and management and what apprenticeships might mean for you, so don't hesitate to get in touch. And also you do have our web link there to be able to go for further information around everything leadership and management and apprenticeships. It only falls to me now to say thank you so much to Jack for giving us such a fabulous run through of all the detail around this. I know it's complicated. You will have a recording of these, the slides and the presentation sent to you, so you will actually be able to go through those at your leisure. But if you do have any questions on it, do come back to us. Thank you very much for joining us. I think we're only 1 minute over, so that's great. Thank you and goodbye.